Greetings and welcome to another episode of Unpacking Islamophobia, a podcast project brought to you from the Bridge.Initiative here at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. I am your host. My name is Arsalan Iftikhar. I'm an international human rights lawyer, senior fellow at the Bridge.Initiative, and author of the book Fear of a Muslim Planet, Global Islamophobia in the New World Order. My guest today is Peter Oborne, who is a British journalist and broadcaster who once served as the former chief political commentator for the Daily Telegraph newspaper. He is author of the books The Rise of Political Lying, The Triumph of the Political Class, and The Assault on Truth, Boris Johnson, Donald Trump, and the Emergence of a New Moral Barbarism. Mr. Oborne writes a political column for Middle East Eye and has previously sat as a commissioner for the Citizens Commission on Islam, Participation, and Public Life, and he was once awarded the Press Awards Columnist of the Year award in 2012 and again in the year 2016. Peter Oborne, thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure. I love the Bridge Initiative. I think you do fantastic things.
That's very kind of you, Peter. And you can't start a conversation about Islamophobia in the United Kingdom without telling us a little bit about the current state of Islamophobia across the UK today, in your opinion. What are your thoughts on the state of Islamophobia as it exists today across the UK?
It's been a very serious matter, the hostility to Muslims, Islamophobia, for quite a long time in the United Kingdom. It's gone, you can date it back, to the, very particularly to 9/11 and then the 7/7 and the Islamophobia in the media. And it's got worse and worse. But of course, in the last 5 months since October the 7th, it's got out of control. And actually, in the last few days, it's got absolutely virulent in Britain. There's a sort of moral panic going on as we speak about Muslims, and it's very frightening and it's horrible. There's something very ugly about the British government at the moment, the Sunak government, which is, I think, trading on Islamophobia in order to win votes. I mean, we're entering election year, and there have been a whole series of episodes which suggest to me very strongly that the electoral strategy of the Conservative government is to target Muslims, rather as Donald Trump did in the United States in 2016. And we're seeing one sort of outburst after another from very senior Conservatives, which seems to me to be part of a strategy. You'll be very familiar at the Bridge Initiative with the so-called Great Replacement theory, the white conspiracy that foreigners, particularly I think Muslims, are set on taking over our country. This is the Great Replacement theory. It derives from France, actually, not from Britain. And this is more or less the whole theory of this has become part of the language of the British government. We've had talk about a sort of Islamic seizure of power, or we've had talk of radical Islamists threatening House of Commons. This is all going on around me as I speak to you on this podcast. It's one of the nastiest moments for 20 years or more.
You talk about the 2024 upcoming elections, and I'd like you to unpack a little bit about how you think the 2024 British elections could potentially impact the lives of Muslims across Great Britain moving forward.
I think it's a threatening situation if you're a British Muslim. In fact, I talk to younger Muslims, they're talking about leaving the country, some of them, when they, it's getting like that. There was the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, went to Italy shortly before Christmas to meet it's a political journey, not a heads of state journey, in order to talk at the Italian party, the hard right Italian party, which is currently in power. And he talked the rhetoric of the demographic threat to the West and the migration, mass migration. And I saw that as quite significant, that Prime Minister Maloney is far right in Italy, and for the British Prime Minister to go and mingle at an event which people like Steve Bannon had appeared at before, Orbán in Hungary. And I think he was joining this quite significant group of far-right leaders, Le Pen in France, Orbán in Hungary, the AfD in Germany, Modi in India, who gain electoral advantage by targeting Islam. And I watched this. I went, why is Sunak doing this? And lo and behold, at the start of 2024, we're getting a series of really disreputable remarks by Tory leaders. The former Prime Minister Liz Truss was on a platform in the States with Steve Bannon, listening to Bannon praise Tommy Robinson, who's a sort of far-right Islamophobe, as a hero. And she didn't sort of really resile from that, get really angry. Absolutely not. He's a really serious threat to public order, and he's a bigot. No, none of that. We had the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, sort of claiming that somehow radical Islam are taking control of the country. You've had a number of other such episodes, all in the last few days. And if you're a Muslim, you are being treated as an object here. You're not being listened to. In fact, this sort of language, I mean, you can see it becoming dangerous for ordinary Muslims as they walk in the streets. And I feel sick to my stomach watching it happen. I mean, of course, you've had the same things in the States, but it's getting very nasty in Britain.
Yeah, and I want to. I'd like you to unpack that a little bit. I always tell people that Islamophobia in the United States is different than the Islamophobia in the UK, which is different than France and Germany and all across the world. And one of the things that we often have to unpack is the fact that there is both liberal Islamophobia and conservative Islamophobia within these different paradigms, right? So we have Republican Islamophobia, which is Donald Trump and his ilk here, and Democratic liberal Islamophobia as well. And so what I'd love you to talk about is, in your opinion, what are some of the similarities and differences that you see between Islamophobia within the Labour and the Tory parties today? Meaning, what does liberal Islamophobia look like within the Labour Party today? And what does conservative Islamophobia look like within the Tories today?
It's a very interesting question, because you're quite right. There is a progressive Islamophobia on the left, the mainstream left, and a bigoted far-right Islamophobia, and which I'm talking about in the Conservative Party. And I think you can say in the Conservative Party, generally speaking, I think it does come from a bigotry and a hatred. In the Labour Party, progressive Islamophobia is something very different, although probably in many cases it has the same roots. And so that is it portrays Islam as a sort of reactionary, socially conservative set of a religion which is hostile, women's rights, gay rights, and the notion that somehow they form a threat to the sort of the modern world that we live in. And this tends to be where those ideas come from in the Labour Party. And of course, there's a mix. The next thing to have come into focus, and it's terribly relevant, this is Gaza. And so we've been having in London a a series of ceasefire marches, one of which I went on, and I've spoken at another event. And this is being represented as a violent Islamist marches, which are hostile to a threat to law and order. When actually, I've been on these marches, as I said, and peaceful events. They're not by no means all Muslims. You know, I marched with the Jewish bloc, as it happens, but they're being represented as anti-Semitic, which is nonsense. As menacing, intimidating. It's a very ugly set of bit of language which is being used against these almost entirely astonishingly peaceful events, as I can testify, and others have too. And this is the next dimension. I can talk in some detail about the events in the House of Commons last week, if you want me to do that.
Please, yes, absolutely.
Very, very interesting episode occurred in the House of Commons. So in British politics, we have Keir Starmer, who is likely to be the Prime Minister, and also Rishi Sunak. Now, both party leaders have entered into a sort of cross-party arrangement whereby both parties have supported Netanyahu's policies in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
Both parties have refused to support a ceasefire, and Rishi Sunak gave his unequivocal support for Netanyahu, and Starmer actually was asked about the policy of collective punishment. This is fairly early on, deprivation of water and so forth. Is that okay? Yes, said Starmer. So he supported collective punishment of the Palestinians in Gaza, and of course that isn't the general sentiment of the British people. The polls suggest that the considerable majority of Britons want an immediate ceasefire. Now, in the House of Commons, the party discipline is administered quite strongly through what we call a system of party control whipping. But the Scottish National Party put up a motion last week for a ceasefire, and it condemned the collective punishment and this was disastrous for Keir Starmer, because quite a lot of his Labour MPs want a ceasefire too, and so he faced a real split in his own party, and he went and saw the Speaker of the House of Commons and persuaded the Speaker, against precedent and against really the rules of the House of Commons, to have a Labour motion as well, and which basically sabotaged the Scottish National Party's motion. And so he got himself out of a political fix. But because the Labour Speaker had broken the rules effectively, he'd gone against all precedent, which is how the Commons is managed. He then became very unpopular. There were calls for him to go, at which point the Speaker of the House of Commons said the reason he'd made this decision was because he was concerned for the safety of, I think, in particular, Labour MPs, people who were being threatened. So he didn't say who were threatening them, but the immediate read-through from the Islamophobic press and everybody else was these are Muslims. These are, or to use the term radical Islamists or Islamist extremists, are threatening MPs. And then we then got, the middle of last week, a national moral panic. All the papers ran on it, these mobs of pro-Palestinian mobs running amok in central London. It wasn't a safe place, particularly not for Jews to go. And I now, and this was almost universally accepted, this portrayal of these peaceful pro-Palestinian marches as mobs. I did some research in this. I look for evidence of this threat to safety, because if you're going to violently threaten somebody, that's a criminal offence, whoever it may be, whether it's an MP or an ordinary, you or me, or just anybody. but haven't been any arrests or charges made of this so-called intimidation. And when you see them being publicly made, there's nothing to substantiate them. But of course, in this sort of moral panic, actual evidence doesn't matter anymore. The media has joined in, the left-wing media, the Guardian, as well as the Mail, all the media has joined in on this pile-on against Palestinians. Actually, not just I've been on, as I say, those who have gone on these marches, which have been labeled by ministers hate marches. There is a very concerted effort to delegitimize people marching in favor of Gaza, and that has fed into, that's when I say marching in favor of a ceasefire in Gaza, and that has fed into a wave of bigoted attacks on Muslims. It's been very ugly to see.
Well, and I want to talk a little bit about British media. Obviously you're an expert on that, and you alluded to it a little bit in your previous answer. But generally speaking, in your opinion, in terms of media today, what sort of impact has the British media had, whether it's print, broadcast, radio, in terms of fueling Islamophobia across the UK today?
It's absolutely astonishing. I can't tell you how powerful it is. Just you read pretty well any paper, and it's all the same thing. There's intimidation, these mobs, anybody who is calling for a ceasefire. Yeah, Islamists. I mean, when they say Islamist extremists, what they really mean, I think, a lot of it's just Muslims. It's
Okay. Sure.
It's not an extremist position to call for a ceasefire. Look, I mean, how many people have been slaughtered in Gaza, and to be concerned about that, as this terrible things are being done to Palestinians as we speak. And suddenly the wrong people in this argument, the mob rule is actually people trying to stop the killing, not the ones who are supporting the killing. It's a moral inversion on a epic scale. But if you've read your George Orwell, you know all about that. The truth becomes falsehood, and falsehood becomes truth, and so on.
Mm-hmm. And finally, talking about the war in Gaza, how do you think the current war in Gaza will impact Islamophobia, and how Muslims are continued to be seen within British society writ large moving forward?
The effect of it so far has been to enable the media and quite a number of leading politicians who ought to know better to portray Muslims as sort of dangerous threats to mainstream society, threats to Parliament, threats to British institutions, part as a sort of almost an Islamist takeover of Britain. You're getting this wild language. I was reading the newspapers today just to kind of take some record of it. The Daily Telegraph, the Times. These are respectable. Our two major broadsheets. Our equivalent of the New York Times. And that's before you get onto the tabloids like the sort of Daily Mail or the Express. So it's a very dangerous. I think it's potentially dangerous because I think it's going to inflame, people to attack Muslims who are not, could put people in danger. Of course, because they are representing Muslims angered by or wanting a ceasefire in Gaza as themselves somehow violent. You can be stirring up hatred. Well, you are. Clearly, this language is stirring up hatred.
Peter Oborne, I'd like to thank you for joining us today on the Unpacking Islamophobia podcast.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed talking to you.
For more information, please visit bridge.georgetown.edu. We'll see you next time.